So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here today for the Rural FASD Speaker Series. We are absolutely thrilled once again to be joined by, I'm going to say, almost a regular guest now at this point, Karen Moore, who is a registered social worker. If you can hear the applause from our studio audience. And topic that we're looking at today is creating healthy boundaries. And just as a very brief bio, Karen will be sharing her knowledge of why and how to create healthy boundaries to ensure self-care when supporting our loved ones and or providing peer support walking this FASD journey. Karen Moore, MA, MS, BS, ECE, RSW, I'm not sure there's much alphabet left at this point, is a registered social worker who has been working in the field of child, youth, mental health, and family therapy for over 25 years. In her private practice, Piece by Piece, Karen works with families, children, and youth with areas of specialization, including trauma, permanency adoption, GLBTQ2S+, child and youth mental health, anxiety, learning issues, parenting, family therapy. Karen is also sometimes joined in sessions by McKinsey, who is a trained therapy dog from the Social Service Dogs. And McKinsey has certainly joined us a couple of times and a very popular guest when she comes. McKinsey can be part of sessions if clients find that helpful. She has built an international reputation for her training and consulting, working with children, youth, families, and adults. And in fact, we've just recently heard the story about our trip to the States, which was interesting to say the least. And it includes training and consulting with agencies and teams on trauma-informed work, adoption and foster care, leadership, and team building. So once again, we thank Karen for joining us here today and presenting for us.
All right, thanks, Rob. Hi, everybody. It feels kind of strange to be standing up here and because I think the piece that I want to add is that in my professional life, you heard all about that. In my personal life, I'm the mom of 4 kids, and our family was formed by permanency, and I'm now a kin grandmother. And I am a member of this network, as well as sharing some knowledge. So we'll hope that the technology works. You all know that technology and I are not the best of friends, but let's see what we can co-create together. All right. So the place that I wanted to start when we were talking about boundaries is this quote. And Danielle says, "I think so often what people misunderstand about boundaries is that the point of setting them is not to change other people's behavior or convince them to value different things. It's to advocate for yourself, regardless of how they respond." And when I think about conversations that I've had the privilege of having with clients, if I think about the conversations I've had with my partner, if I think about the conversations I've had with myself about boundaries, oftentimes I'm getting caught in that place of thinking, I need to set a boundary so they will do this differently. I need to set a boundary so they will treat me differently. And I think we really have to reframe that and think about, this is not about them. This is about us. And the boundary that we need to set for us is about how we stay healthy, how we stay respected to ourselves. And if we change our boundaries, that may or may not change the other person's behavior, but it will change our perception of the other person's behavior because we've got those healthy boundaries in place. Okay. So I want you to remember that as we go through this, because as human beings, I think our default is often about, oh, clearly I need to change my boundaries here. I need to set some different expectations because somebody is doing something that I don't like. Okay. So I hope you can see that. The font is pretty small. If not, I'm going to read it to you so you can just listen. So I want you to imagine that boundaries are like invisible lines. And those lines are about you setting limits about how you want your personal space, your time, your body, and your energy to be shared or not shared. Okay. And it's about boundaries are like, here where my behavior ends, and here is where your behavior starts. The boundary is the line between me as an individual and you, or us, or them, or the world. So my boundary is saying, this is the piece that I have control over. This is the piece that I have mastery of. And these are the choices I'm going to make, either about my time, my space, my body, my energy. And that invisible line becomes seen by others by the way that you honor or keep your boundaries. So boundary setting is not just about having a healthy boundary, it's also about respecting enough to keep it. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit when it comes to parenting, and especially parenting kids on a neurodiversity journey. It's often hard to try and figure out, how do I keep that healthy boundary, look after or parent them in a healthy way and not be enmeshed in that journey. Okay. When we have healthy boundaries for ourselves, it helps our children be able to become separate and healthy individuals, which doesn't mean they're not still interdependent, not interdependent, interdependent. But it does mean that it helps them become a separate human being from you, that you may still be supportive or supporting, but supporting from a place of individuality rather than this enmeshed one kind of being. Okay. Boundaries or limits, if you want to see it that way, boundaries teach people how to treat you. So oftentimes, especially when we're in our parenting role, sometimes in our partnership role with our significant others, but often in our parenting role, what we try and do is set expectations for people about how they treat us by telling them, you need to treat me more politely. You need to stop swearing at me. You need to stop disrespecting me, okay? But then our boundary or our limit doesn't change. So the next time they swear or treat you in a disrespectful way, what do? You need to treat me with respect. You know, my expectation for you is respect. You know, in our house, we treat each other respectfully, right? You may come up with a bit of a consequence sometimes, but often the consequence belongs to the other person, when in fact it's your boundary that was not respected, and it wasn't respected by you. Oftentimes we say, no, the child's not respecting my boundary. They're continuing to swear. But if you're continuing to say that this, by saying, I need you to change this behavior is not okay, every time they do it, I would challenge you to think that maybe you're not respecting your own boundary and you're giving a mixed message about how much that boundary really matters to you. Okay. I know you're all probably sitting there right now saying, yeah, easier said than done, Karen. That's great. So how do I deal with this swearing? We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Okay. Let me say though, I do not have magical easy answers. I am not an expert on this. I still myself struggle with healthy boundaries sometimes, especially with things like saying no, setting limits for myself, putting myself first. I personify the ongoing learning and journey when it comes to healthy boundaries, okay? Boundaries also help to set the tone about a social interaction about what's appropriate or not appropriate, okay? And we're going to talk about that as well. It helps to teach those social norms, because once again, often when we're trying to set a limit around social norms, we use our words, right? And using our words is not the way that boundaries are set, and they're not the way that boundaries are respected, and they're not the way boundaries are kept. Boundaries are kept with actions, not with words. Okay, you can pair words with actions, but if the only way you're trying to establish or maintain or honor healthy boundaries is with words, you're going to continue to kind of be in that cycle of, I know I set the limit. I know I said this is not what we're going to do. And then the limit gets broken and then you continue on this cycle, right? As I said before, you're going to see this message in here a few times because I think it's essential for all of us. And like I said, myself included, that this belief that I'm going to change somebody else's behavior by setting a boundary. If I'm going to set a boundary about the fact that it's not okay for people to swear at me or treat me disrespectfully, that doesn't mean my boundary says you need to stop, right? The boundary says I will not accept. So I cannot accept that behavior. The other person can continue to swear as much as I'm not going to change that behavior. Maybe with me setting a healthy boundary about what I'm going to accept or not accept, the other person may choose to change their behavior, but not because of my healthy boundary. Okay. It's a really, really important piece for us to try and get a sense of, because I think that a lot of mainstream parenting, even techniques and strategies, speak about setting limits so that the child's behavior changes. And so that's where we get caught. That's where we get caught. Boundaries are about changing your own behavior, not somebody else's. Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you have a friend or a child. Well, it's a little bit different if it's a child. But let's say you have your child and they're calling you at work and you say to them, or they're texting you at work and you say, I can't take any calls for the next hour. I'm in a meeting. If you need something, call your other parent. Okay. Boundary set. Then the child texts you again and you say, I told you. So texting is the written form of talking, right? So it's still trying to talk through rather than set them. I told you I can't take any meetings, messages from you right now. You need to call your other parent. They text you again. You ignore it this time. Then they call you. You pick up the phone and you say, I told you I can't take calls from you. You need to call your other parent. Okay. 3 times you have reestablished what you think you have done is reestablished your boundary. But in fact, what have you done? Broken your boundary. And what message have you given to the child about your boundary? It's okay to be respected. Yeah. And that it's flexible, right? That maybe you kind of mean that you're not accessible, but there's got to be some room here, right? Sometimes we say, I'm not available unless it's an emergency, but we don't clarify what the emergency is. And so child says, it is an emergency. I don't know where to find the Nutella. And you're like, that is not an emergency in my world, right? But being able to be clear that if you say in your boundary and you set your boundary, I am not available from 9 to 10, you should mean you're not available from 9 to 10. If you mean I'm not really available from 9 to 10, but you can text me 6 times between 9 and 10, then say that's your boundary. Okay. Okay. So there are 3 types of boundaries. These are the first 2. The first one is really showing up funny, isn't it? So enmeshed is this idea of you are in, your boundaries with someone are so connected or interconnected that it's not really clear what's yours and what's the other person. So there's this lack of sense or this not clear about, is this your issue? Is this my issue? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this what you're supposed to be doing? Whose problem is this? What part of this is your problem? You forgot to take your lunch to school. You call me. I say to you, I'm not available, but then I drive to school and take your lunch to school because I don't want you to starve, would be an enmeshed boundary probably. Okay. If I say I'm not available to be called, you need to call the other parent. You call the other parent texts you and says, Johnny forgot their life-saving medication that's in your purse and needs to have it at school. I would suggest that's not an enmeshed boundary. Okay, so you see the difference? The life-saving medication is a life or death situation. There's not an enmeshment there. The forgetting the lunch, child is not going to start. Are they going to be happy? No. Are they going to be hungry? Yes. Are they going to remember to take their lunch tomorrow if you take it for them today? Probably not. So the question is, who owns the problem about the lunch? The boundary of your job to take your lunch to school, right? I'm setting this boundary. If you choose or forget to not take it, we could come up with some strategies, but I don't own this. I have a boundary about this, okay? The other part or issue around enmeshed boundaries is that the person who keeps trying to meet the needs or keeps kind of sacrificing their own boundaries, if you will, starts to feel resentment. So for example, I have you know, this idea of my sister has 4 children. And this isn't about my family because I have a sister and I have 4 children, but my sister won't do babysitting or childcare. So it's not a real example, but it could be. I wish it was a real example, actually. My sister has 4 children. She says she needs help with childcare. I say to her, I can provide childcare on Tuesdays and Thursdays for you. And that's my boundary. And I say, Tuesdays and Thursdays is what I can offer you. And then she says, yeah, that's great. That's great. And the first week she says, oh, my childcare fell apart for Monday and Wednesday. Can you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? And you think, do I want to? Am I able to? Am I rescuing or am I helping? Right? Sometimes the way you can tell if the boundary is something that is fluid, and a fluid boundary is okay, depending on the circumstances, or if it's someone taking advantage of you, is that idea of, am I helping or am I rescuing? Okay. You have to be able to, though, answer that question truthfully, because in the lunch example, you could say to yourself, I'm helping my child by taking their lunch to school, when in essence, the chances are you're probably rescuing them. Okay, so you have to be able to be your own critic about your decision making about whether you're rescuing or helping when you are looking at changing your boundaries. Okay, rigid boundaries are on the other end of the continuum. So I want you to imagine enmeshed boundaries are down here and rigid boundaries are down here. So the third boundary is obviously the one in the middle that we're going to talk about in a minute, and that's the one we're going to try and aim for. But rigid boundaries are the ones that are either too firm, you know, those boundaries that no matter what, this is my limits. And it doesn't take into account like situational pieces. It's like that one size fits all. And you can often hear a rigid boundary when you hear something like, I never, or I will never, or I just don't ever, whatever the situation is, okay? For some circumstances, you may have a rigid boundary and a very strong boundary. And there's nothing wrong with rigid boundaries in certain circumstances. We're talking about if you have rigid boundaries all the time, okay? A rigid boundary about, you know, for example, no one is allowed to hit me. It's a pretty okay boundary, except you will probably have some nuance to that to say, if my child is in a meltdown and they hit me, I'm not going to charge them with assault if they're 9 years old. Well, we can't charge them with assault if they're 9 years old. So there's not that rigidity to it, rather than if anybody hits me, the police are being called in every single circumstance. Okay? See the difference? Okay. So the third kind is the goal. Okay, and the third kind is what this talk is named, which is healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries are boundaries that do have a sense of balance. They take into account individual circumstances. They take into account the reality of what life is serving up, and they're boundaries that don't feel too weak, like those enmeshed boundaries where you kind of get taken advantage of and kind of stomped all over, and too rigid, where you're not willing to be even thinking about a change to something that you're saying or your stance. even if circumstances suggest. So if we go back to the lunch example, a rigid boundary would be, you may have life-saving medication in your lunch, but it's your job to remember your lunch. I'm not taking it to school. Okay. You may have a healthy boundary that says, I will take your life-saving medication and I will take the lunch, parts of your lunch, but I won't take all the treats. Right? Maybe that's the way that you will set that limit. Or you will say, today I will bring it to you. And from now on, we need to think about how that medication is available at school. So you don't need to remember it and I don't need to remember it for you. Okay, that would be a healthy example of that boundary. Okay. Healthy boundaries feel appropriate for the situation and they're able to be kept consistently without having to go to extremes. Okay. And that consistency piece matters because if you think you have healthy boundaries that you're continually changing, I think you need to look at whether in fact you have enmeshed boundaries. And you may think that they're coming from a place of healthy because you're trying to be, supportive, you're trying to be useful, but if you think about the fact that if you set a boundary and most times the boundary gets changed, adapted, stretched, you may be looking at enmeshed boundaries, okay? The other time that we see the desire to set a healthy boundary is a parent will set a healthy boundary and get a difficult reaction from their child, and then they will reassess that boundary, and then it moves to enmeshment. Okay, so they change the boundary, not because they think the boundary needs to be changed, but because of the child's behavior. Okay, make sense? Okay, any questions? We're good so far? Okay. Remember, healthy boundaries are about the behavior of the person who is creating the boundaries, not the other person. Okay, so if my sister says to me, Karen, can you look after my kids Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? The question actually isn't, can I? The question is, do I want to change the boundary that I have set to meet that request? And I need to think about my own behavior. So if I say, okay, yeah, I will, but then I get resentful and say, I can't believe every time she says it, she asks me to change it. And when we have an agreement, every time she changes it, and I'm getting resentful, I'm changing the boundaries for the wrong reason. And I'm actually moving into an enmeshed boundary situation with my sister, not a healthy boundary. I think I'm doing it to be helpful, but I really don't want to. And so I get resentful and I don't see whose issue is this really, right? Am I helping or am I rescuing? Okay. Helping and rescuing the other person, helping and rescuing myself. Okay. So why would we go through the hassle of setting healthy boundaries? Because it's hard work. And it's not easy to do. And it's especially not easy to do when you're parenting a neurodiverse person, whether they're children or adults. Boundary setting becomes part of the journey every single day. And so probably often one of the most tiring parts of setting healthy boundaries in our lives is setting healthy boundaries. And sometimes it feels easier to just say, okay, whatever, you've asked 500 times if the rule about this can change, or you've asked 500 times if I will drive you somewhere, even though I told you Friday night is my time. You keep asking, you keep asking, you keep asking. I'm going to change your behavior. I'm going to stop you from asking by changing my boundary and saying, yes, I'll drive you. Okay? I don't want to. I've told you Friday night is my night. You're not hearing me. You're not respecting that boundary. But by telling you, yes, okay, I'm teaching you my boundaries aren't actually real. And the way that you can get through my boundaries is to hound me. Okay. So the benefits of setting healthy boundaries is better self-care, because you can proactively be able to put a boundary in, like Friday night is my night. Friday night, I'm just doing my stuff. And it may not look like it's really a lot of important stuff for you. It may look like I'm doing nothing. Well, to be honest with you, I'm probably not doing anything. That's what I want to do. But it helps to promote healthy self-care, okay, in a proactive way sometimes and in a reactive way sometimes. That idea of I am done tonight, I'm not doing anything. That's my limit, okay? Clear expectations to others about how you want to be treated. That idea that, because if you always give in with your boundaries, you give an unsaid message that boundaries are worth giving in. That you, as my child, shouldn't have boundaries that are setting limits either, right? Because we're mirroring that, right? We're teaching that. So it sets clear expectations to others about how you want to be treated, and also teaches the message that it's okay to set clear expectations about how a person wants to be treated. So when we are talking to our kids about things like healthy sexuality, when we're talking to our kids about consent, when we're talking to our kids about how they're going to interact with peers, if we're talking to them about setting those boundaries and having those expectations about how they want to be treated, we're giving them some energy to suggest that, in fact, that's a valid thing to do because they've seen us do the same thing. Okay? It can improve relationships. It doesn't look like it sometimes in the short term, because in the short term, when you have those healthy boundaries, you often have people upset with you. Because you're saying my needs are coming first for a little while. And that can feel selfish, and it is selfish. And it's interesting that the word selfish started to have a negative connotation and a negative definition, when in fact, the idea of selfish is to do something for yourself. And so when you set these healthy boundaries, you are not going to have a full fan club behind you saying, way to go, I love that you set that limit, I'm so proud of you. Your partner probably may not like it. Your children may not like it. Your employer may not like it. Your family members may not like it, right? But that's the reality of setting healthy boundaries, is it's not about them. It's about you. And I was just about to say but, I'm trying not to use the word but. And if you are healthier, if you are feeling like you're respecting your own time, if you feel like you aren't burning out, you are going to be a better person in those interactions with those families, friends, kids, etc. Okay? It can improve mental health, and it promotes that autonomy that I was talking about. And the autonomy with your kids is not just about your kids. Your autonomy with your kids is also about you as a parent, because if you have a mesh boundaries with your children, as your children move into older developmental stages and they start to or want to move into independence, you're going to hold on to them, because you don't know where they start and you end. You don't know where you start and they end. And so you're going to have a much harder time in letting go. And you're going to have a much harder time in your kids making their own mistakes, because you are going to see that you can help them with those mistakes or rescue them. Help them or rescue them. Oftentimes, the way that when I'm working with families and when I try and do this for myself, I talk about the fact, is this a life-altering mistake that they are going to make? And do I have a responsibility and an ability to help make some difference here? So that's my first way of kind of figuring that out. The second piece is, I need to then have a boundary to be able to say, I will unconditionally love you, and I will not rescue you from all of the decisions you make in your life.
That and piece is really, really hard.
Yeah, it's very hard.
Really.
It's very,
But it's healthy if you can do it.
if you can do it, and it's easier if you don't have the means. So let me give you an example. Let's say, and I'll use a ridiculous example. Let's say that your child embezzled $1 million from their employer. And they call you and say, I have 12 hours to get this money back to my employer. And if I get this money back to my employer, I'm not going to go to jail. I'm not going to get into trouble. Okay. Most of us don't have access to $1 million that we can give to our child to save them from the consequences of their choices or their behavior. So that makes it easier to us to be able to say, I can help you get some support. I can, help you talk to a lawyer about what your options are here. I don't have $1 million. The other part of that statement is, even if I did, I don't think I would give it to you, but you don't have to say that out loud because you don't have it. Where it becomes different is if your child calls you and says, I stole $500 from my employer. I have 24 hours to give the $500 back. Some of us may have the ability to be able to provide the $500. My question to you is the circumstance any different? You have to decide that for yourself. Okay. So, using words to set a boundary, I've already talked about that with that phone call, right? What you do, instead of saying to them or texting them, I told you not to call your other parent. Why are you still calling me? Why are you still texting me? I told you I can't. You either ignore or you block. And you follow your boundary with an action. I am not available from 9 to 10. My number will be blocked from 9 to 10. You could even set that boundary and say, from 9 to 10, because I'm not available, you will see that my number is blocked. When my meeting is over, I will unblock my number so that we don't trigger worry, trauma, etc. for our kids, right? Which is a really important piece. But being able to say to them from 9 to 10, you will see I'm not available. If you need something, your other parent is. Okay? And then block your number. And then don't text them halfway through and say, I'm just making sure you're okay because I know I said I wasn't available, but I know that your dad or your mom hasn't heard from you, and normally I would have heard from you 6 times already, right? No. You need to keep your own healthy boundaries, okay? You also need to not rescue your parenting partner from the responsibility of being available from 9 to 10. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I may get a message like, I tried and they're not available and I really need, this is not mine to solve. This is for the two of you to solve. My healthy boundary is still in existence here. From 9 to 10, I'm not available. And in fact, it's easier if I block the number or if I turn my phone off, because then I'm not tempted to, oh, I saw a message come in. I am on a break. I really do have 5 minutes. I could answer it. I could probably solve it really quickly. I probably know the answer better than my partner does. I could do this in 5 minutes. It's going to take them 2 hours to see. I do have these same dilemmas, right? I'm not just making this up. I live this. It's easier if I block the number or if I turn off my phone and I put it away until 10 o'clock, which is when I said I'm available again. Okay. When you change your own behavior or your action, the dynamic in the relationship changes. So that doesn't mean you setting the limit is for the purpose of changing the other person's behavior. But whenever there's a dance between two people and one person starts to dance differently, the other person has no choice but to do something different. They can continue, right? If you're slow dancing and the other partner starts to go off and start discoing by themselves in the corner, the other person has a choice to keep slow dancing by themselves. They could go off the dance floor. They could join you in the disco dancing, right? But by virtue of you changing your behavior or setting a limit, the other person then has some choices to make that is completely and separate apart from you and you dancing over here in the corner, right? So we're not setting boundaries and limits to change other people's behaviors, but when we set boundaries, healthy boundaries, when we set any boundary, it happens, but when we set healthy boundaries for sure, the dynamics between the relationship has to change. Okay. So let's give you another example. Let's say that you've got 2 kids, you're playing a game with them. And the kids are starting to fight, and the one kid says to the other kid, I'm not playing with you anymore because you're cheating. And you're playing and you see that the child is cheating. And it's not the first time. You have set a boundary that I'm not going to play games with people who cheat. This is a conversation you've had. It's not like a first time thing. Usually, what we tend to do is say, Johnny, I told you, we don't cheat when we play games. If you cheat again, I'm gonna stop playing with you. And Johnny's like, this is the 10th time I've cheated. And this is the 10th time you told me this. You're not gonna stop playing. You're just gonna give me a lecture again. You don't really mean the boundary that you don't play with people who cheat. What your boundary is I wish my child would not cheat when they play games with me. So I'm gonna try and set a boundary to change my child's behavior. Instead, when the child cheats, you say, okay, game's over, guys. I said, I don't like to play if people don't follow the rules of the game. So the game is done. And you get up, not angry, not upset, not shaming, but with that limit of, my boundary is I don't play if people are cheating, and my boundary's been met, so I'm gonna go and do something else. Okay? The idea that we often reinforce behavior we say we want to stop by talking it out, by pointing it out, and then often in that journey, inadvertently shaming and blaming by saying things like, remember, Johnny, I told you 4 times already that cheating is not okay. And I don't like to play with kids who are cheating. And I was really looking forward to playing this game with you. We've been talking about this all week. So I was really looking forward to this. And we've only been playing it for 5 minutes and you're cheating. Do you not want to play the game with me? Are you not looking forward to it as much as I am? All of that creates the shame, the blame. For those of you who have taken 7 core issues with me, right? That shame, that blame, that identity piece, it creates all of that when what you're trying to really do is convince your child to follow the boundary that you have set for yourself. Okay? So we don't want to reinforce behavior we want to stop. If I really want my child to not cheat when they play games with me, I'm not going to play games with them until they don't cheat. Or I'm going to change my boundary, right? I may reassess my boundary and say, you know what, that's too rigid. My child doesn't know how to not cheat. My child's brain has an impulsive piece to it that as soon as they see that there's a competition, their brain takes over and they'll do whatever they can to win the game. So maybe my boundary of saying I won't play with you if you cheat is not a fair boundary. It's too rigid. How do I turn this into a healthy boundary? Maybe we play a game where there's no winners. Maybe we play a cooperative game where we all have to win together, right? Maybe we look at saying that, we're going to start with we're going to do an experiment to say everybody can cheat. There's no rules for the game. And let's see how we all feel if we just do whatever we want and see if everyone likes to play the game like that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a possibility, but really thinking about, is your boundary too rigid based on your child's needs? At the same time, making sure you're not rescuing your child because they have a reality of FASD or neurodiversity. It does not mean that they can't play games that have rules, because life is full of rules. And so if they can't, how are we going to help them learn that skill in the boundaries that we're setting for ourselves, so that we're not becoming enmeshed in trying to use the game as a way of changing their behavior? We're setting a limit for ourselves. Okay. Okay. Learn to say no to yourself. One of the things that in the literature that talks about is that being able to set that boundary of saying no to other people, but you have to say no to yourself first, right? So you have to be able to say, okay, what am I really able to do this week? What do I want to do? So that when opportunities or requests come, you're already clear in yourself what you're going to say yes or no to, right? So, if, for example, someone were to call me today and say there's an opportunity to go to Australia to do training.
Yes.
Right? Am I able to say yes to that? And what am I going to let go of to be able to say yes to that, right? Or if someone says, can you be on these 4 committees? I really need to be clear which one of those committees am I committed to before I'm asked, okay? Or I need to be able to say to myself, Karen, why are you saying yes to this? Why do you want to say yes to this? And more importantly, why are you not saying no? Okay. So we need to be able to say no to ourselves, and then we need to act on it, which is saying no to other people. Okay. People aren't going to like your no. And so we need to make sure we don't attach our sense of self-esteem, our sense of mattering to people based on their reaction to our boundary. Okay. If someone's asked you to be on a committee, it's either because they think you have the skills, they really like you, or they're desperate. Okay. A no to any of those reasons is not what they want to hear. But you're not using your boundaries for other people. You're using them for yourself. What do you want to hear yourself say? Okay. And then if and when you get a reaction from other people to try and change your boundaries, be clear that your boundaries are for you and that they may not like it, and you can work that through with them, but that doesn't mean you're going to change your boundary. Okay. So that's being clear about what you need or want, so you can share that clarity with others with your actions, not with your words, or not with your words alone. Okay. So you want to have flexibility rather than being rigid, but you don't want to be a wet noodle. Okay. So that is the dilemma, is how you can be flexible but not taking advantage of, how you can be flexible but not being rigid. And it comes case by case, bit by bit, but it also comes really with you sitting and being proactive with yourself and saying, what is my boundary here? What am I able to do? What do I want to do? Because it's not just about ability, it's also about want. Okay. And if I set the boundary here to say, yes, I'll be on your committee, what does it mean I have to give up on? Or what does it mean I have to do less of? Sleep, I don't know, read books that have no, message other than they take me off to a place where I can just escape for a little while, right? Often it's the self-care pieces that get off the plate if we say yes to too many of the other things. Okay. Boundaries are a reflection of what you value, including if you value yourself. And if you teach your children that you value yourself, you give them a huge gift of the message that they can value themselves. Okay? They're a reflection of who you see you are and your role, your belief in what is your responsibility, and your ability or not to put your needs first. Okay. There are two resources that I would highlight for you. The one is How to Set Limits. It's from the Crisis Prevention Institute, and it actually has some neat stuff about how to set boundaries and limits in difficult situations. The other one I would suggest is a book called Stop Walking on Eggshells for Parents. It's actually written for parents of kids who have borderline personality disorder, but I would suggest to you that the majority of the strategies and the knowledge and the thinking of that book is actually helpful if you're parenting any child who has needs that bring you into the potential to be enmeshed and bring you into the potential of experiencing difficult behavior if you set healthy boundaries. So you don't have to have a child who has an official diagnosis of borderline personality disorder for the information and some of the techniques in that book to be quite useful. And it's pretty accessible. Like, it's pretty easy reading. And that's it. So I don't know if people have questions or. Oh.
So thank you so much, Karen. That was, I think, definitely extremely helpful for everyone that is listening to this presentation today. We know that particularly in our society today, being able to maintain boundaries in general is extremely challenging, and definitely having some of those strategies. The one that stands out the most for me is the way you kept referring to the fact it has to be action, that it cannot just be based on words, that there has to be an action involved, and the fact that the boundary is for you, not the other person. And so I think that's definitely the two big takeaways, and thinking through what that looks like and how that's done. So once again, folks, we want to thank you for joining us here today for this month's speaker series. And again, we heard from Karen Moore of Piece by Piece, psychotherapists looking at healthy boundaries. We'll see you again next month.
Yeah.